good afternoon, good morning, and or good night, depending on when you're watching this. Today is National Aquatic Animal Day. You know what that means? Dolphins. It reminded me about dolphins. It made me want to create another read along for so long, and thanks for all the fish. This book, funniest freaking book I've ever read. Let's get back into it. I know it's been like a month, but let's try to finish it. It's a really short book, and I don't know why I have so many videos on it. Chapter 11, let's go. April showers I hate especially. However non-committally Arthur grunted, the man seemed determined to talk to him. He wondered if he should get up and move to another table, but there didn't seem to be one free in the whole cafeteria. He stirred his coffee fiercely. Bloody April showers. Hate, hate, hate. Arthur stared, frowning out the window. A light, sunny spray of rain hung over the motorway. 2 months he'd been back now, slipping back into his old life had in fact been laughably easy. People had such extraordinary short memories, including him. 8 years of crazed wanderings around the galaxy now seemed to him not so much like a bad dream as like a film he had videotaped off television and now kept in the back of a cupboard without bothering to watch it. One effect that still lingered, though, was his joy at being back. Now that the Earth's atmosphere had been closed over his head for good, he thought wrongly. Everything within it gave him extraordinary pleasure. Looking at the silvery sparkle of the raindrops, he felt he had to protest. Well, I like them, he said suddenly, and for all the obvious reasons. They're light and refreshing. They sparkle and make you feel good. The man snorted derisively. That's what they all say, he said, and glowered darkly from his corner seat. He was a lorry driver. Arthur knew this because his opening, unprovoked remark had been, "I'm a lorry driver." I hate driving in the rain. Ironic, isn't it? Bloody ironic. If there had been a sequitur hidden in this remark, Arthur had not been able to divine it, and had merely given a little grunt. Affable, but not encouraging. But the man had not been deterred then, and was not deterred now. They all say that about bloody April showers, he said. So bloody nice. So bloody refreshing. Such charming bloody weather. He leaned forward, shrinking his face up as if he was going to say something extraordinary about the government. What I want to know is this, he said. If it's going to be nice weather, why, he almost spat, can't it be nice without bloody raining? Arthur gave up. He decided to leave his coffee, which was too hot to drink quickly and too nasty to drink cold. Well, there you go, he said, and instead got up himself. Bye. He stopped off at the service station shop, then walked back to the parking lot, making a point of enjoying the fine play of rain in his face. There was even, he noticed, a faint rainbow glistening over the Devon hills. He enjoyed that too. He climbed into his battered but adored old black VW Rabbit, squealed the tires, and headed back out past the islands of gas pumps and along the slip roads to the motorway. He was wrong in thinking that the atmosphere of the Earth had closed finally and forever above his head. He was wrong to think it would ever be possible to put behind him the tangled web of irresolutions into which his galactic travels had dragged him. He was wrong to think he could now forget that the big, hard, oily, dirty, rainbow-hung Earth on which he had lived was a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot, lost in the unimaginable infinity of the universe. He drove on, humming, being wrong about all these things. The reason he was wrong was standing by the slip road under a small umbrella. He saw his jaw sagged. He sprained his ankle against the brake pedal and skidded so hard he very nearly turned the car over. "Fenny! Fenny!" he shouted, having narrowly avoided hitting her with the actual car. He hit her instead with the car door as he leaned across and flung it open. It caught her hand and knocked away the umbrella from it. Within then bowed wildly across the road. "Shite!" yelled Arthur, as helpfully as he could, leaned out of his own door, narrowly avoiding being run down by McKenna's all-weather haulage, and watched in horror as it ran down Fanny's umbrella instead. The lorry swept along the motorway and away. The umbrella lay like a recently swatted daddy long leg, expiring sadly on the ground. Tiny gusts of wind made it twitch a little. He picked it up. He said. There didn't seem to be a lot of point in offering the thing back to her. "How do you know my name?" she said. Well, he said, look, I'll get you another one. He looked at her and tailed off. She was tallish with dark hair, which fell in waves around a pale and serious face. Standing still, alone, she seemed almost somber, like a statue to some important but unpopular virtue in a formal garden. She seemed to be looking at something other than what she looked, as if she was looking at. Weirdly worded. But when she smiled, as she did now, suddenly, it was as if she had just arrived from somewhere. Warmth and life flooded into her face, an impossibly graceful movement into her body. The effect was very disconcerting, and it disconcerted Arthur like hell. She grinned, tossed her bag into the back, and swiveled herself into the front seat. Don't worry about the umbrella, she said to him as she climbed in. It was my brother's, and he can't have liked it, or he wouldn't have given it to me. She laughed and pulled on her seatbelt. You're not a friend of my brother's, are you? No. Her voice was the only part of her which didn't say, good. Her physical presence there in the car, his car, was quite extraordinary to Arthur. He felt, as he let the car pull slowly away, that he could hardly think or breathe, and had hoped that neither of these functions was vital to his driving, or they were in some trouble. So what he had experienced in the other car, her brother's car, the night he had returned exhausted and bewildered from his nightmare years in the stars, had not been the unbalance of the moment, or, if it had been, he was at least twice as unbalanced now, and quite liable to fall off whatever it is that well-balanced people are supposed to be balancing on. So, he said, hopping to kick the conversation off to an exciting start. He was supposed to pick me up, my brother, but phoned to say he couldn't make it. I asked about buses, but the man started to look at the calendar rather than a timetable, so I decided to hitch. So here I am. And what I would like to know is how you knew my name. Perhaps we ought to first sort out, said Arthur, looking back over his shoulder as he eased his car into the motorway traffic, where I'm taking you. Very close, he hoped, or a long way. Close would mean she lived near him. A long way would mean he could drive her there. I'd like to go to Taunton, she said. Please, if that's all right. It's not far. You can drop me at... You live in Taunton? He said, hoping that he'd managed to sound merely curious rather than ecstatic. Taunton was wonderfully close to him. He could... No. London, she said. There's a train in just under an hour. It was the worst possible thing. Taunton was only minutes away up the motorway. He wondered what to do. And while he was wondering himself with horror, saying, Oh, I can take you to London. Let me take you to London. Bungling idiot. Why on earth had he said let in that stupid way? He was behaving like a 12-year-old. She looked at him severely. Are you going to London? She said. Yes, he didn't say. And I've got to step on it, he failed to add, omitting to glance at his watch. I wasn't, he said. But, bungling idiot, it's very kind of you, she said. But really, no, I like to go by train. And suddenly she was gone. Or rather, that part of her which brought her to life was gone. She looked rather distantly out the window and hummed lightly to herself. He couldn't believe it. 30 seconds into the conversation, and already he'd blown it. Grown men, he told himself, and flat contradiction of centuries of accumulated evidence about the way grown men behave. Do not behave like this. Taunton, 5 miles, said the signpost. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly the car wobbled. He was going to have to do something dramatic. Fenny, he said. She glanced round sharply at him. You still haven't told me how... Listen, said Arthur. I'll tell you. Though the story is rather strange. Very strange. She was still looking at him, but said nothing. Listen. You said that, did I? Oh, there are things I must talk to you about, and things I must tell you. A story. I must tell you which would... He was thrashing about. He wanted something along the lines of, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon the fretful porcupine, but didn't think he could carry it off, and didn't like the hedgehog reference, which would take more than 5 miles, he settled in the end, rather lamely. He was afraid. Well, just supposing, he said, just supposing. He didn't know what was coming next, so he thought he'd sit back and listen, that there was some extraordinary way in which you were very important to me, and that, though you didn't know it, I was very important to you, and it all went for nothing because we only had 5 miles, and I was a stupid idiot at knowing how to say something very important to someone I've only just met, and not to crash into lorries at the same time. What would you say, he paused helplessly and looked at her, I should do? Watch the road, she yelped. Shite. He narrowly avoided careening into the side of 100 Italian washing machines and a German lorry. I think, she said, with a momentary sigh of relief, you should buy me a drink before my train goes. Hey, I'm back. Chapter 12. There is, for some reason, something especially grim about pubs near stations. A very particular kind of grubbiness, a special kind of pallor into the pork pies. Worse than the pork pies, though, are the sandwiches. There is a feeling which persists in England that making a sandwich interesting, attractive, or in any way pleasant to eat is something sinful that only foreigners do. Make 'em dry is the instruction buried somewhere in the collective national consciousness. Make 'em rubbery. If you have to keep the boogers fresh, do it by washing them once a week. It is by eating sandwiches in pubs at Saturday lunchtime that the British seek to atone for whatever their national sins have been. They're not altogether clear what those sins are, and don't want to know either. Sins are not the sort of thing one wants to know about. But whatever sins there are amply atoned for by the sandwiches they make themselves eat. If there is anything worse than the sandwiches, it is the sausages which sit next to them. Joyless tubes, full of gristle, floating in a sea of something hot and sad, stuck with a plastic pin in the shape of a chef's hat, a memorial, one feels, for some chef who hated the world and died, forgotten and alone among his cats in the back stair in Stephanie. The sausages are for the ones who know what their sins are and wish to atone for something specific. There must be somewhere better, said Arthur. No time, said Fanny, glancing at her watch. My train leaves in half an hour. They sat at a small wobbly table. On it were some dirty glasses and some soggy beer mats with jokes printed on them. Arthur got Fanny a tomato juice and himself a pint of yellow water with gas in it, and a couple of sausages. He didn't know why. He bought them for something to do while the gas settled in his stomach. The barman dunked Arthur's change in a pool of beer on the bar, for which Arthur thanked him. All right, said Fanny, glancing at her watch. Tell me what it is you have to tell me. She sounded, as well she might, extremely skeptical, and Arthur's heart sank. Hardly, he felt, the most conducive setting to try to explain to her, as she sat there, suddenly cool and defensive, that in a sort of out-of-body dream he had had a telepathic sense that the mental breakdown that she had suffered had been connected with the fact that, appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, the Earth had been demolished to make way for a new hyperspace bypass, something which he alone on Earth knew anything about, having virtually witnessed it from a Vogon spaceship, and that furthermore, both his body and soul ached for her unbearably, and he needed deeply to go to bed with her as soon as was humanly possible. Very romantic. Fanny, he started, I wonder if you'd like to buy some tickets for our raffle? It's just a little one. He glanced up sharply. To raise money for Angie, who's retiring. What? And needs a kidney machine. He was being leaned over by a rather stiffly slim, middle-aged woman with a prim knitted suit and a prim little perm, and a prim little smile that probably got licked by prim little dogs a lot. She was holding out a small book of cloakroom tickets in a collecting tin. Only 10 pence each, she said, so you could probably even buy two without breaking the bank. She gave a tinkly little laugh and then a curiously long sigh, saying, without breaking the bank had obviously given her more pleasure than anything since some GIs had been billeted on her in the war. Yes. All right, said Arthur, hurriedly digging in his pocket and procuring a couple of coins. With infuriating slowness and prim theatricality, if there was such a thing, the woman tore off 2 tickets and handed them to Arthur. I do hope you win, she said with a smile that suddenly snapped together like a piece of advanced origami. The prizes are so nice. Yes, thank you, said Arthur, pocketing his tickets rather brusquely and glancing at his watch. He turned toward Fanny. So did the woman with the raffle tickets. And what about you, young lady, she said. It's for Angie's kidney machine. She's retiring, you see. Yes? She hoisted a little smile even further up her face. She would have had to stop and let it go, or the skin would surely split. Look, here you are, said Arthur, and pushed a 50-pence piece at her in the hope that that would see her off. Oh, we are in the money, aren't we? Said the woman, with a long, smiling sigh. Down from London, are we? Arthur wished she wouldn't talk so slowly. No, that's all right, really, he said with a wave of his hand as she started with an awful deliberation to peel off 5 tickets, one by one. Oh, you must have your tickets, insisted the woman, or you won't be able to claim your prize. They're very nice prizes, you know. Very suitable. Arthur snatched the tickets and said thank you as sharply as he could. The woman turned to Fanny once again. And now, what about... No! Arthur nearly yelled. These are for her, he explained, brandishing the 5 new tickets. Oh, I see. How nice. She smiled sickeningly at both of them. Well, I do hope you... Yes, snapped Arthur. Thank you. The woman finally departed to the table next to theirs. Arthur turned desperately to Fanny and was relieved to see that she was rocking with silent laughter. He sighed and smiled. Where were we? You were calling me Fanny, and I was about to ask you not to. What do you mean? She twirled the little wooden cocktail stuck in her tomato juice. It's why I asked if you were a friend of my brother's, or a half-brother, really. He's the only one who calls me Fanny, and I'm not fond of him for it. So what's... Fenchurch. What? Fenchurch. Fenchurch. She looked at him sternly. Yes, she said, and I'm watching you like a lynx to see if you're going to ask the same silly question that everyone asks me till I want to scream. I shall be cross and disappointed if you do. Plus, I shall scream, so watch it. She smiled, shook her head a little forward over her face, and peered at him from behind it. Oh, he said, that's a little unfair, isn't it? Yes. Fine. All right, she said with a laugh. You can ask me. Might as well get it over with. Better than having you call me Fanny all the time. Presumably, said Arthur. We've only got 2 tickets left, you see. And since you were so generous when I spoke to you before... What? Arthur snapped. The woman with the permanent smile and now nearly empty book of cloakroom tickets was waving the last 2 under his nose. I thought I'd give you the opportunity because the prizes are so nice. She wrinkled up her nose a little confidently. Very tasteful. I know you'll like them. And if it is for Angie's retirement present, you see, we want to give her a kidney machine. Yes, said Arthur. Here. He held out 2 more 10-pence pieces to her and took the tickets. A thought seemed to strike the woman. It struck her very slowly. You could watch it coming in like a long wave on a sandy beach. Oh dear, she said. I'm not interrupting anything, am I? She peered anxiously at both of them. No, it's fine, said Arthur. Everything that could possibly be fine, he insisted. It's fine. Thank you, he added. I say, she said in delighted ecstasy of worry. You're not in love, are you? It's very hard to say, said Arthur. We haven't had a chance to talk yet. He glanced at Fenchurch. She was grinning. The woman nodded with knowing confidentiality. I'll let you see the prizes in a minute, she said, and left. Arthur turned with a sigh back to the girl that he found it hard to say whether he was in love with. You're about to ask me, she said. A question. Yes, said Arthur. We can do it together if you like, said Fenchurch. Was I found in a handbag, joined in Arthur. In the left luggage office, they said together, at Fenchurch Street Station, they finished. And the answer, said Fenchurch, is no. Fine, said Arthur. I was conceived there. What? I was in the left luggage office? Hooted Arthur. No, of course not. Don't be silly. What would my parents be doing in the left luggage office? She said, rather taken aback by the suggestion. Well, I don't know, spurted Arthur. Or rather, it was in the ticket queue. The ticket queue. Or so they claim. They refuse to elaborate. They only say you wouldn't believe how bored it is. It is possible to get in the ticket queue at Fenchurch Street Station. She sipped demurely at her tomato juice and looked at her watch. Arthur continued to gurgle chipperly for a moment or two. I'm going to have to go in a minute or two, said Fenchurch, and you haven't begun to tell me whatever this terrifically extraordinary thing is that you were so keen to get off your chest. Why don't you let me drive you to London, said Arthur. It's Saturday. I've got nothing particular to do. No, said Fenchurch. Thank you. It's sweet of you, but no. I need to be by myself for a couple of days. She smiled and shrugged. But you can tell me another time. I'll give you my number. Arthur's heart went boom, boom, churn, churn as she scribbled 7 figures in pencil on a paper scrap and handed it to him. Now we can relax, she said with a slow smile which filled Arthur till he thought he would burst. Fenchurch, he said, enjoying the name as he said it. A box, said a trilling voice. cherry liquors, and also, I know you'll like this, a gramophone record of Scottish bagpipe music. Yes, thank you, very nice, insisted Arthur. I just thought I'd let you have a look at them, said the permed woman. As you're down from London. She was holding them out proudly for Arthur to see. He could see that they were indeed a box of cherry brandy liquors and a record of bagpipe music. That was what they were. I'll let you have your drink in peace now, she said, patting Arthur lightly on his seething shoulder. But I knew you'd like to see. Arthur re-engaged his eyes with Fenchurch's once again, and suddenly was at a loss for something to say. A moment had come and gone between the two of them, but the whole rhythm of it had been wrecked by that stupid, blasted woman. Don't worry, said Fenchurch, looking at him steadily from over the top of her glass. We will talk again. She took a sip. Perhaps, she added, it wouldn't have gone so well if it wasn't for her. She gave a wry smile and dropped her hair forward over her face again. It was perfectly true. He had to admit, it was perfectly true. That was chapter 12. Arthur surely is in the money. Chapter 13. That night, at home, as he was prancing around the house, pretending to be tripping through cornfields in slow motion and continually exploding with sudden laughter, Arthur thought he could... There is a error, okay. Arthur thought he could even bear to listen to the album of bagpipe music he had won. It was 8 o'clock, and he decided he would force himself to listen to the whole record before he phoned her. Maybe he should even leave it till tomorrow. That would be a cool thing to do. Or next week sometime. No games. He wanted her and didn't care who knew it. He definitely and absolutely wanted her, adored her, longed for her, wanted to do more things that there were names for with her. He actually caught himself saying things like, yippee! As he pranced ridiculously around the house, her eyes, her hair, her voice, everything. He stopped. He would put on the record of bagpipe music. Then he would call her. Would he, perhaps, call her first? No, what he would do was this. He would put on the record of bagpipe music. He would listen to it, every last banshee wail of it. Then he would call her. That was the correct order. That was what he would do. He was worried about touching things in case they blew up when he did so. He picked up the record. It failed to blow up. He slipped it out of its cover. He opened the record player. He turned on the amp. They both survived. He giggled foolishly as he lowered the stylus onto the disc. He sat and listened solemnly to A Scottish Soldier. He listened to Amazing Grace. He listened to something about some glen or other. He thought about his miraculous lunchtime. They had just been on the point of leaving when they were distracted by an awful outbreak of yoo-hooing. The appalling permed woman was waving to them across the room like some stupid bird with a broken wing. Everyone in the pub turned to them and seemed to be expecting some sort of response. They hadn't listened to the bit about how pleased and happy Angie was going to be about the £4.30 everyone had helped to raise toward the cost of her kidney machine. Had been vaguely aware that someone from the next table, had won a box of cherry brandy liquors. It took a moment or two to cotton onto the fact that the yoo-hooing lady was trying to ask them if they had ticket number 37. Arthur discovered that he had. He glanced angrily at his watch. Fenchurch gave him a push. Go on, she said. Go and get it. Don't be bad-tempered. Give them a nice speech about how pleased you are, and you can give me a call and tell me how it went. I want to hear the record. Go on. She flicked his arm and left. The regulars thought that one was on me. The regulars thought his acceptance speech a little over offensive. It was, after all, merely an album of bagpipe music. Arthur thought about it and listened to the music and kept on breaking into laughter. Chapter 14. Ring, 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 ring. Hello? Yes? Yes, that's right. Yes. You'll have to speak up. There's an awful lot of noise in here. What? No, I only do the bar in the evenings. It's Yvonne who does lunch, and Jim, he's the landlord. No, I wasn't on. What? You'll have to speak up. What? No, don't know nothing about no raffle. What? No. Don't know nothing about it. Old nun. Hold on. I'll call Jim. The barmaid put her hand over the receiver and called over the noisy bar. Jim, Bloke on the phone says something that he's won a raffle. He keeps on saying it's ticket 37 and he's won. No, there was a guy in the pub here who won, shouted back the barman. He says, have we got the ticket? Well, how can he think he's won if he hasn't even got the ticket? Jim says, how can you think you've won if you haven't even got the ticket? What? She put her hand over the receiver again. Jim, he keeps effing at me. Says there's a number on the ticket. Of course there was a number on the ticket. It was a bloody raffle ticket, wasn't it? And it says it means it's a telephone number on the ticket. Put the phone down and serve the bloody customers, will you? That was chapter 14. We will move on to chapter 15. 8 hours west sat a man alone on a beach mourning an inexplicable loss. He could only think of his loss in little packets of grief at a time, because the whole thing was too great to be bore. He watched the long, slow Pacific waves come in along the sand and waited for the nothing that he knew was about to happen. As the time came for it not to happen, it dully didn't happen, and so the afternoon wore itself away, and the sun dropped beneath the long line of the sea, and the day was gone. The beach was a beach we shall not name, because his private house was there, but it was a small, sandy stretch somewhere along the hundreds of miles of coastline that run west from Los Angeles, which is described in one of the new editions of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in one entry as junky, wonky, lunky, stunky, and what's the other word? And all other kinds of bad stuff. Woo! And in another, written only hours later as being like several thousand square miles of American Express junk mail, but without the same sense of moral depth. Plus the area is, for some reason, yellow. The coastline runs west and then turns north up to the misty bay of San Francisco, which the guide describes as a good place to go. It's very easy to believe that everyone you meet there also is a space traveler. Starting a new religion for you is just their way of saying hi. Until you've settled in and got the hang of the place, it is best to say no to 3 questions out of any given 4 that anyone may ask you, because there are some very strange things going on there, some of which an unsuspecting alien could die of. The hundreds of curling miles of cliffs and sand, palm trees, breakers, and sunsets are described in the guide as buffo, a good one. And somewhere on this good buffo stretch of coastline lay the house of this inconsolable man, a man who many regarded as insane, but this was only, as he would tell people, because he was. One of the many, many reasons why people thought him insane was the peculiarness of his house, which, even in the land where most people's houses were peculiar in one way or another, was quite extreme in his peculiarness. His house was called the outside of the asylum. His name was simply John Watson, though he preferred to be called, and some of his friends now had reluctantly agreed to do this, Wonko the Sane. In his house were a number of strange things, including a gray glass bowl with 8 words engraved upon it. We can talk of him much later on. This is just an interlude to watch the sun go down and to say that he was there watching it. He had lost everything he had cared for, and was now simply waiting for the end of the world, realizing that it had already been and gone. Wonko the Sane. When I first read this, I thought he was a clown. Sounds like a clown name. These chapters are very short, so I'll just keep going. That was chapter 15, chapter 16. Let me get a sip of water first, sorry. Chapter 16. After a disgusting Sunday spent emptying rubbish bins behind a pub in Taunton and finding nothing, no raffle ticket, no telephone number, Arthur tried everything he could to find Fenchurch. And the more he tried, the more weeks passed. The more things he tried, the more weeks passed. He raged and railed against himself, against fate, against the world and its weather. He even, in his sorrow and his fury, went and sat in the motorway service station cafeteria where he had just been before he met her. It's the drizzle that makes me particularly morose. Please shut up about the drizzle, snapped Arthur. I would shut up if it would shut up drizzling. Look, but I'll tell you what it will do when it shuts up drizzling, shall I? No, bladder. What? It will bladder. Arthur stared over the rim of his coffee cup at the grisly outside world. It was a completely pointless place to be, he realized, and had been driven there by superstition rather than logic. However, as if to bait him with the knowledge that such coincidences could in fact happen, Fate had chosen to reunite him with the lorry driver he had encountered there last time. The more he tried to ignore him, the more he found himself being dragged back into the whirlpool of the man's exasperating conversations. "I think," said Arthur vaguely, cursing himself for even bothering to say this, "that it's easing off." "Ha!" Arthur just shrugged. "He should go. That's what he should do. He should go." "It never stops raining," ranted the lorry driver. He thumped the table, spilled his tea, and actually for a moment appeared to be steaming. "You can't just walk around without responding to a remark like that." "Of course it stops raining," said Arthur. It was hardly an elegant refutation, but it had to be said. "It rains all the time," raved the man, thumping the table again, in time to the words. Arthur shook his head. "Stupid to say it rains all the time," he said. Oh, my phone is dying. Sorry about that. The man's eyebrow shot up, affronted. "Stupid? Why is it stupid? Why is it stupid to say it rains all the time, if it rains all the time? Didn't rain yesterday. Did in Darlington." Arthur paused warily. "You're going to ask me where I was then yesterday," said the man. No, said Arthur, "but I expect you can guess. Do you?" "Begins with a D." "Does it? And it was pissing down there, I can tell you." "You don't want to sit there, mate," said a passing stranger in overalls cheerily to Arthur. "That's the Thundercloud corner. That is, reserved special for old raindrops keep falling on my head here. There's one reserved in every motorway calf between here and the sunny Denmark. Steer clear is my advice. It's what we all do. How's it going, Rob? Keeping busy? Got your wet weather tires on? Har har." He breezed by and went to tell a joke about Britt Eklund to someone at a nearby table who roared with laughter. "See? None of them bastards take me seriously," said Rob McKenna. "But," he added darkly, leaning forward and screwing up his eyes, "they all know it's true." Arthur frowned. "Like my wife," hissing the sole owner and driver of McKenna's all-weather haulage. "She says it's nonsense, and I make a fuss and complain about nothing. But," he paused dramatically, and darted out dangerous looks from his eyes, "she always brings the washing in when I phone to say I'm on my way home." He brandished his coffee spoon. "What do you think of that?" "Well, I have a book," he went on. "I have a book. A diary. Kept for 15 years. Shows every single place I've ever been. Every day. And also what the weather was. And it was uniformly," he snarled, "horrible. Horrible. All over England, Scotland, Wales. I've been all around the continent. Italy, Germany, back and forth to Denmark, been to Yugoslavia. It's all marked in and charted. Even when I went to visit my brother," he added, "in Seattle." "Well," said Arthur, getting up to leave at last, "perhaps you'd better show it to somebody." "I will," said Rob McKenna. And he did. I tried to pause it, and it stopped recording. So, looks like we're adding all these videos together. Chapter 17. I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm trying to make it an hour special for Aquatic Animal Day, pretty much Dolphin Day. Chapter 17. Misery, dejection, more misery and more dejection. He needed a project and he gave himself one. He would find where his cave had been. On prehistoric Earth, he had lived in a cave. Not a nice cave, a lousy cave. But there was no but. It had been a totally lousy cave and he had hated it. But he had lived in it for 5 years, which made it home of some kind. And a person likes to keep track of his homes. Arthur Dent was such a person, and so he went to Exeter to buy a computer. That was what he really wanted, of course, a computer. But he felt he ought to have some serious purpose in mind before he simply went and blew a lot of bread on what people might otherwise mistake as being just a thing to play with. So that was his serious purpose, to pinpoint the exact location of a cave on prehistoric Earth. He explained this to the man in the shop. "Why?" said the man in the shop. "That was a tricky one." "Okay, skip that," said the man in the shop. "How?" "Well, I was hoping you could help me with that." The man sighed and his shoulders dropped. "Have you much experience with computers?" Arthur wondered whether not to mention Eddie, the shipboard computer on the Heart of Gold, who could have done the job in a second, or Deep Thought, but decided he wouldn't. "No," he said. "Looks like a fun afternoon," said the man in the shop. But he said it only to himself. Arthur bought the apple anyway. Over a few days, he also acquired some astronomical software, plotted the movements of stars, drew rough little diagrams on how he wanted to drew rough little diagrams of how he seemed to remember the stars to have been in the sky when he looked up out of the cave at night, and worked away busily at it for weeks, cheerfully putting off the conclusion he knew he would inevitably have to come to, which was that the whole project was completely ludicrous. Rough drawings from memory were futile. He didn't even know how long it had been. Beyond Ford's prefix rough guess at the time that it was a couple of million of years. He simply didn't have the math. Still, in the end, he worked out a method which would at least produce a result. He decided not to mind the fact that the extraordinary jumble of rules of thumb, wild approximations, and arcane guesswork he had been using, he would be lucky to hit the right galaxy. He just went ahead and got a result. He would call it the right result. Who would know? As it happened, through the myriad of unfathomable chances of fate, he got it exactly right, though he, of course, would never know that. He had just went to London and knocked on the appropriate door. "Oh, I thought you were going to phone me first," Arthur gasped in astonishment. "You can only come in for a minute," said Fenchurch. "I'm just going out." Yeah. Extraordinary coincidence there, mate. Beautiful. Fate. Love. Chapter 18. Summer's days in Islington, full of the mournful wail of antique restoring machinery. Fenchurch was unavoidably busy for the afternoon, so Arthur wandered in a blissed-out haze and looked at all the shops, which in Islington are quite a useful bunch, as anyone who regularly needs old woodworking tools, Boer war helmets, drag, office furniture, or fish, will readily confirm. The sun beat down over the roof gardens. It beat on architects and plumbers. It beat on barristers and burglars. It beat on pizzas. It beat on estate agents' particulars. It beat on Arthur, as he was going into a restored furniture shop. "It's an interesting building," said the proprietor cheerfully. "There's a cellar with a secret passage which connects with a nearby pub. It was built for the Prince Regent, apparently, so he could make his escape when he needed to." "You mean, in case anyone might catch him buying stripped pine furniture?" said Arthur. "No," said the proprietor. "Not for that reason." "You have to excuse me," said Arthur. "I'm terribly happy." "I see." He wandered hazily on and found himself outside the offices of Greenpeace. He remembered the contents of a file marked "Things to Do, Urgent," which he hadn't opened again in the meantime. He marched in with a cheery smile and said he'd come to give them some money to help free the dolphins. "Very funny," they told him. "Go away." This wasn't quite the response he had expected, so he tried again. This time they got quite angry with him, so he just left some money anyway and went back out into the sunshine. Just after 6, he returned to Fenchurch's house in the alleyway, clutching a bottle of champagne. "Hold this," she said, shoved a stout rope in his hand, and disappeared inside to the large white wooden doors from which dangled a fat padlock off the black iron bar. The house was a small converted stable in the light industrial alleyway behind the derelict Royal Agricultural Hall of Islington. As well as its large stable doors, it also had a normal-looking front door of smartly glazed paneled wood with a black dolphin door knocker. I don't remember that. That's cool. The one odd thing about the door was its doorstep, which was 9 feet high, since the door was set into the upper of the 2 floors and presumably had been used originally to haul up hay for hungry horses. An old pulley jutted out of the brickwork above the doorway, and it was over this that the rope Arthur was holding was slung. The other end of the rope held a suspended cello. The door opened above his head. "Okay," said Fenchurch. "Pull on the rope, steady the cello, pass it up to me." He pulled on the rope. He steadied the cello. "I can't pull on the rope again," he said, without letting go of the cello. Fenchurch leaned down. "I'm steadying the cello," she said. "You pull on the rope." The cello eased up level with the doorway, swinging slightly, and Fenchurch maneuvered it inside. Come on up yourself," she called down. Arthur picked up his bag of goodies and went in through the stable doors, tinkling. The bottom room, which he had seen briefly before, was pretty rough and full of junk. A large cast-iron clothes wringer stood there. A surprising number of kitchen sinks were piled in the corner. There was also, Arthur was momentarily alarmed to see, a baby carriage, but it was very old and uncomplicatedly full of books. The floor was old, stained concrete, excitingly cracked, and this was the measure of Arthur's mood as he started up the rickety wooden steps in the far corner. Even a cracked concrete floor seemed to him an almost unbearable sensual thing. An architect friend of mine keeps on telling me how we could do wonderful things with this place, said Fenchurch chattily, as Arthur emerged through the door. He keeps on coming around, standing in stunned amazement, muttering about space and objects and events and marvelous qualities of light. Then says he needs a pencil and disappears for weeks. Wonderful things have therefore, so far, failed to happen to it. In fact, thought Arthur as he looked about, the upper room was at least reasonably wonderful anyway. It was simply decorated, furnished with things made out of their cushions, and also a stereo set with speakers, which could have impressed the guys who put up Stonehenge. There were flowers, which were pale, and pictures, which were interesting. There was a sort of gallery structure in the roof space, which held a bed, and also a bathroom, which Fenchurch explained you could actually swing a cat in. But, she added, only if it was a reasonably patient cat and didn't mind a few nasty cracks about the head. So, here you are. Yes. They looked at each other for a moment. The moment became a longer moment, and suddenly it was a very long moment. So long, one could hardly tell where all the time was coming from. For Arthur, who could usually contrive to feel self-conscious if left alone for a long enough time with a Swiss cheese plant, the moment was one of sustained revelation. He felt on the sudden like a cramped and zoo-born animal who wakes one morning to find the door to his cage hanging quietly open and the savannah stretching gray and pink to the distant sun, which all around new sounds are waking. He wondered what the new sounds were as he gazed at her openly wandering face and her eyes that smiled with a sharp surprise. He hadn't realized that life speaks with a quiet voice to you, a voice that brings you answers to the questions you continually ask of it. Had never consciously detected it or recognized its tones until it now said something as it had said to him before, said something it had never said to him before, which was, yes. Fenchurch dropped her eye away at last, with a tiny shake of her head. I know, she said. I shall have to remember, she added, that you are the sort of person who cannot hold on to a simple piece of paper for 2 minutes without winning a raffle with it. She turned away. Let's go for a walk, she added quickly. Hyde Park. I'll change into something less suitable. She was dressed in a rather severe, dark dress, not a particularly shapely one, and it didn't really suit her. I wear it specially for my cello teacher, she said. He's a nice old boy, but I sometimes think that all the bowing gets him a bit excited. I'll be down in a moment. She ran lightly up the steps to the gallery above and called down, put the bottle in the fridge for later. She noticed as he slipped a champagne bottle into the door that it had an identical twin to sit next to. She walked over to the window and looked out. He turned and started to look at her records. From above, he heard the rustle of her dress fall to the ground. He talked to himself about the sort of person he was. He told himself very firmly that for this moment at least, he would keep his eyes very firmly and steadfastly locked on the spines of her records. Read the titles, knock appreciatively, count the blasted things if he had to. He would keep his head down. This he completely, utterly, and abjectly failed to do. She was staring down at him with such intensity that she seemed hardly to notice that he was looking up at her. Then, suddenly, she shook her head, dropped the light sundress down over her head herself, and disappeared quickly into the bathroom. She emerged a moment later, all smiles and with a sun hat, and came tripping down the steps with an extraordinary lightness. It was a strange kind of dancing motion she had. She saw that he noticed it and put her head slightly on one side. Like it? She said. You look gorgeous, he said simply because she did. She said, as if he hadn't really answered her question. She closed the upstairs door, which had stood open all this time, and looked around the little room to see if it was all fit state to be left on its own for a while. Arthur's eyes followed hers around, and while he was looking in the other direction, she slipped something out of a drawer and into the canvas bag she was carrying. Arthur looked back at her. Ready? Did you know, she said with a slightly puzzled smile, that there's something wrong with me? Her directness caught Arthur unprepared. Well, he said, I'd heard some vague sort of, I wonder how much you do know about me, she said. If you heard from where I think you heard, then that's not it. Russell just sort of makes things up, because he can't deal with what it really is. A pang of worry went through Arthur. Then what is it, he said. Can you tell me? Don't worry, she said. It's nothing bad at all, just unusual. Very, very unusual. She touched his hand and then leaned forward and kissed him briefly. I shall be very interested to know, she said, if you managed to work out what it is this evening. Arthur felt that if someone tapped him at that moment, he would have chimed, like the deep, sustained, rolling chime his gray fishbowl made when he flicked it with his thumbnail. That was chapter 19. And that was chapter 18. Let's finish it off. Let's finish it off with chapter 19. Chapter 19. Hold up. 1 second. Had to turn the music back on. Sorry about that. Chapter 19. Ford Prefect was irritated to be continually awakened by the sound of gunfire. He slid himself out of the maintenance hatchway, which he had fashioned into a book for himself by disabling some of the noisier machinery in its vicinity, and had patted in its vicinity and patting it with towels. He slung himself down the access ladder and prowled the corridors moodily. They were claustrophobic and ill-lit, and what light there was continually flickering and dimming as power surged this way and that through the ship, causing heavy vibrations and rasping, humming noises. That wasn't it, though. He paused and leaned back against the wall as something that looked like a small silver power drill flew down in the corridor past him with a nasty searing screech. That wasn't it either. He clambered listlessly through a bulk door and found himself in a larger corridor, though still ill-lit. The ship lurched, and it had been doing this for a fair bit, but this was heavier. A small platoon of robots went by, making a terrible clattering. Still not it, though. Acrid smoke was drifting up from one end of the corridor, so he walked along it the other direction. He paused a series of observation monitors built into the walls behind plates of toughened but still badly scratched plexiglass. One of them showed some horrible green scaly reptilian figure ranting and raving about the single transferable vote system. It was hard to tell whether he was for it or against it, but he clearly felt very strongly about it. Ford turned the sound down. That wasn't it, though. He passed another monitor. It was showing a commercial for some brand of toothpaste that would apparently make you feel free if you used it. There was a nasty blaring music with it, too. That wasn't it. He came upon another, much larger three-dimensional screen that was monitoring the outside of the vast silver Zaxian ship. As he watched 1,000 horribly beweaponed Zerzlub robot star cruisers came searing round the dark shadows of a moon, silhouetted against the blinding disk of the star Zazis, and the ship simultaneously unleashed a vicious blaze of hideously incomprehensible forces from all its orifices against them. That was it. Ford shook his head irritably and rubbed his eyes. He slumped onto the wrecked body of the dull silver robot, which clearly had been burning earlier on, and had now cooled down enough to sit on. He yawned and dug his copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy out of his satchel. He activated the screen. He flickered idly through some level 3 entries and some level 4 entries. He was looking for some good insomnia cures. He found rest, which was what he reckoned he needed. He found rest and recuperation, R&R, and was about to pass on when he suddenly had a better idea. He looked up at the monitor screen. The battle was raging more fiercely every second. The noise was appalling. The ships juddered, screamed, and lurched as each new bolt of stunning energy was delivered or received. He looked back down at the guide again and flipped through a few likely locations. He suddenly laughed and then rummaged into his satchel again. He pulled out a small memory dump module, wiped off the fluff and biscuit crumbles, and plugged it into the interface in the back of the guide. When all the information that he could think was relevant had been dumped onto the module, he unplugged it again, tossed it lightly in the palm of his hand, put the guide away in his satchel, smirked, and went in search of the ship's computer databanks. Chapter 19. That was the last chapter we're going to read. Thank you for listening. I feel like my videos, you just go to sleep too. We're getting into my favorite parts of the book. Arthur and Fenchurch's little love story and what's wrong with her. Quite beautiful if you ask me. Anyway, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed. Readers are leaders. Readers are leaders. Readers lead to heed. I made that my new YouTube channel name, Readers Lead to Heed. Readers lead to heed, in parentheses, heed to God. Anyway, I don't know why I had to say that. Good afternoon, good morning, and good night. Hope you had a great listening session. Hope you enjoyed the book. All the love, all the power. Bye.